Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our meeting of Committee of the Whole in public this evening. I would like to call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order and acknowledge that we meet this evening from many locations, mostly within the ancestral homelands of the Algonquin Nation, unceded and unsurrendered since time immemorial. We thank the Algonquin people for hosting us on their land, and in our meeting, we will endeavor to uphold traditional Indigenous values focused on shared wisdom, protection of the land, care for children, gratitude, humility, honor, trust, balance, doing well unto others, and preventing harm to others. We need a motion to approve the agenda. Would someone like Trustee Nash? Thank you. Is there any discussion on the agenda? And I'm seeing none. I will call the question then. All those in favor of the agenda as presented and opposed, motion is carried. Moving on then to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from anyone tonight? And I'm not seeing any, which brings us then to briefing from the chair. Chair Lyra.
Thank you. It has been 1 week since the start of school, and I'd like to begin my remarks with a special thank you to all of the staff for your care and support for students and families as we begin our new school year. With the start of the new school year, we have also had an election for the position of Vice Chair of the Board, and I would like to congratulate Trustee Scott on her election. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to Trustee Justine Bell for her service as the Vice Chair since last November. The OCDSB will be hosting a speaker series event on Tuesday, September 19th for parents. Presenter Ann Douglas will share strategies for strengthening relationships between parents and guardians and their children. More details and registration information can be found on our website. And finally, I'd like to recognize this is a very special time of year for the Jewish community. Rosh Hashanah is coming up this weekend and Yom Kippur begins the following week. Best wishes to all families who are marking these important days. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair Lyra. And are there any questions for the chair? And I'm not seeing any questions. I will, however, echo the appreciation to Trustee Bell for having served as our Vice Chair ever since November last year, and wish her well, and glad she's still with us. So moving on then, next item is the briefing from the Director Buffoni.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It was such a pleasure to welcome and return, of course, a welcome and a welcome back for our students, our families, and our staff last school week. I had the pleasure of attending two sites, Shingwakan Public School and Charles H. Hulse Public School, one that I had never been to before and the other that I'm very familiar with, just to witness the joy of teaching and learning environments firsthand. It was a real pleasure. Despite the hot weather and transportation challenges, educators, including our principals and vice principals, our staff, and of course our custodial staff as well, across the district contributed to a great start to the school year. A special thank you to everyone that worked so hard, in particular, to open our newest elementary school, Wazason Public School. While school officially began September 1st, I also want to acknowledge that the students who worked hard in our summer programs, as well as the staff who supported this learning throughout the summer period. Registration for our night school programs is now open until September 25th. Night school is a great way for our students to upgrade on a course, take a class not available at their home school, and for adult learners to upgrade their courses and skills, as well as work towards an Ontario Secondary School diploma. Details can be found on our website. The OCDSB has created a new Safe Schools reporting tool. It's a private and anonymous way that students can share their concerns. If they feel unsafe or worried about a friend or a classmate, they can send a report through anonymously on the website at ocdsb.ca/reportit. The tool can be used for concerns about many different things like bullying, hate or discrimination, mental health concerns, vaping or drugs, or other concerns that may be affecting our students. I should note as well that the tool is not intended as a replacement for talking to their teachers or other educators or administrators. It's just another way for students to seek support and help. Finally, I'd like to invite members of the public to join us on Saturday, September 23rd for the annual Open Trails Day at McSkimming Outdoor Education Center. It's a great opportunity to visit the OCDSB's 425-acre outdoor classroom. Bring family and take a hike through the trails and discover the biodiversity of this unique site. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And are there any questions for the Director on this briefing? And again, I'm seeing none, which brings us to our delegations tonight. And we do have one oral delegation and 3 written delegations. For the oral delegation, we do have 2 minutes, and we ask that it stick to the topic and look forward to hearing it. There will be a timer that is visible so that you know when you're approaching the end of your time. And after the delegation is finished, then there may be up to 3 questions from trustees for clarification. And it's not a time for debate, but just to make sure we've actually understood what we're being told. So thank you very much and welcome Ms. Allison Kane regarding the situation of picking up students, I believe, or dropping off students at OSTA. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, school board members, parents, and attendees. My name is Allison Kane, and I am the parent of a Hillston student. I am here today to bring attention to a change in OSTA's safety guidelines that, to my knowledge, parents and principals were not informed of. Before I get into it, I am aware that the school board has no control over OSTA. I am hoping that by bringing this to your attention, you will then notify parents and staff so the situation that occurred last week is not repeated. I would like to give OSTA the benefit of the doubt and assume that their lack of notification was simply an oversight in the chaos of the new school year, but that lack of communication directly led to a child being put in an extremely dangerous situation. OSTA has changed their elementary drop-off policy. Instead of needing an adult at the stop for all students grade 4 and under, they have lowered it to grade 1 and under. This means children as young as 7 can be left alone in the street, and as it's within policy, the drivers are not required to notify anyone. Last week, this led to a 7-year-old being left alone on the street, far too close to the transitway for any parent's comfort, for an hour. It was a full hour between that child being dropped off and me and my child passing the stop and seeing her there hysterical and terrified. As parents, I'm sure I don't need to remind you of the 1001 things that could have gone wrong. Because the driver wasn't required to notify anyone, no one knew she was there until I called the school in a panic, telling them to contact her mom, let her know her child is with her friend's mom. She's safe, but get here quick because she's pretty freaked out. I need to make it abundantly clear that me and my child passing that stop was pure luck. If we had taken any of the 3 other routes home that day, we never would have known she was there either. When I spoke to her principal the next morning, she told me that she had no clue about the change in policy until she called to ask why one of her students had been left on the street. I understand that OSTA has a lot going on right now, but this is a major child safety issue that parents and schools needed to be made aware of. I am asking the members of the board to make all parents and staff aware of the change so that parents can make arrangements with neighbors to keep eyes on bus stops and call them if their child ends up there alone. This situation was traumatic for all involved, and it is my hope that if the board can make the appropriate people aware of the change, no other kids end up in this situation. Thank you for your time.
And thank you very much for your very nicely timed presentation. Obviously, practice pays off. And looking around the table, are there any questions of clarification for Ms. Kane? And I will go to Suzanne Lyon, who is a non-voting representative from our Parent Involvement Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to the presenter. I'm sorry, I have my back to you while I'm speaking to you.
We've got enough.
Are you aware of any other incidents that took place similar to this in the first week of school? And are you aware of any follow-up action that's been taken since that incident?
I do not know of any other incidents that have taken place similar. I do know that the school principal has put extra checks in place now to make sure that students that aren't supposed to be on the bus do not accidentally end up on the bus. from what I could tell from the conversation I had with the principal was that Asta just didn't let anybody know and was surprised that she was surprised that one of her students was left on the street.
Thank you very much. And I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, who have we got? Oh, Trustee Bell. Sorry about that, Trustee Bell.
No problem. Thank you very much for this delegation and for bringing this issue to the board. Must have been very, very petrifying for you as a mother. I wanted to ask, in your communications with Asta, was there any indication that they're open to revisiting this this new policy change that under the age of what did you say, it was grade 1?
Yeah.
Or over the it used to be over the age, or under the age of grade 4, that were not left alone, and now it's up to, anyway,
Under
please, if
grade
you could
1.
just clarify again that, and
It used to be under grade 4, you had to have an adult at the stop for the child to be let off the bus at all. Now it's under grade 1.
And
So
I guess my clarification for the administration then, is there a possibility for us to advocate that that policy be revisited? Thank you.
So we've had the response in terms of when the policy change happened, and two of our OSTA, or actually 4 members of our OSTA board of directors who sit there on behalf of the board are present tonight. So I'm sure that this will be followed up. Mr. Director. Thank you. And thank you very much for taking the time to come out and make your presentation. Oh, we have one more. Sorry about that, Trustee Kaplan-Worth.
That's okay. Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just actually want a clarification. Because this sounds so scary, and I'm just wondering what the 7-year-old child left alone on the street. Can you just clarify for me where on the street? Like, was this on the way to school, left on the street, or on
No, she was dropped off after school.
and just not dropped off at home, but
No,
rather
at her school bus stop, which is at the corner. It's like less than a minute walk from the Transaway there at Churchill and Scott. It was after school. Nobody was informed. It was terrifying. Like, I'm spending half my next check on a GPS watch for my child just in case now.
But what I guess what I'm confused about is who was supposed to meet that child?
That she wasn't even supposed to get on the bus.
Oh, I
She
see.
was supposed to be at the aftercare that's
Oh, I
attached to the
see.
school.
So it was like she got on the bus. I understand. Okay, that's horrific. Thank you.
And once again, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your time.
And I will draw trustees' attention to the 3 written delegations, all of which have to do with the Riverside South attendance boundary, and in particular, the proposals regarding moving students from Farley Mowat, where they currently attend, from Riverside South to Steve McLean. So that will be coming up in our next item, I believe. And that brings us to matters for action. Items 8.1, report 23-048, the Riverside South attendance boundary. Mr. Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn this over to Superintendent Giroir, Associate Director Giroir.
Through you, Chair, I'm actually going to turn it over to the Manager of Planning, who has written this report and will be most appropriate to present it.
Thank you. If I could have the boundary map up, the first one, please. So this evening, we're here to seek committee approval to go on to board for the opening grade structure, program offering, and attendance boundary for a new secondary school located in Riverside South. So oftentimes planning reports are fraught with angst and difficulty. This one's a little happier with the opening of a new high school. But that said, the opening of a new high school is obviously, if you've gone through the report, really complex. It involves a huge number of other schools, and there are a number of moving parts. So before I get into what I hope is a fairly succinct report, I did want to take a moment to sincerely thank the working group who worked with us on this and gave us advice from the community. the trustees and school principals and school reps who were very much involved in this, and the great number of the members of the public who spoke up about it. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge Taylor West and Julie Earle, who were the lead planners from the planning staff on this, and all the good work they did on it. So as I said, the establishment of a high school is a good news story, but a complicated one. There were no less than 7 high schools to be considered in this particular report. And we had to move and consider a number of elementary school boundaries and structures. As you can imagine, with all of these, as I said, moving parts, we do try and listen very carefully to what everyone has to say and try and keep everyone pleased with what's going on. But it really does become, at the end of the day, impossible to include everyone who might want to be included in such a new school boundary. And sometimes we do have to draw a line, and somebody obviously falls within the line and someone without. The consultation, however, the one that we had was a good one. It is not the first time that we've been in this school community of late, and actually we've built a fairly good rapport with the people in the community and have gotten to know them. As you can imagine, the same faces have shown up again and again, and so they've been very helpful in coming up with this. They've also done really good outreach into the community itself to make sure that if people weren't involved in a school at this current point in time, they at least knew about that new high school that was being built and had their interests reflected. With the consultation, we do find it best to start, and we did about this time last year, a little later than this last year. We started with a proposal for you with a consultation plan, and it had a proposed boundary contained therein. For new trustees, sometimes there's a bit of concern that we've gone ahead and included a draft boundary for your consideration, but the screen in front of you also reflects major changes to that proposed boundary, and that's as a result of the feedback that we've gotten from the public. So using it as a bit of an example to allay fears, if you've got those with the next report, for example, including a draft boundary gives people something to kind of get their teeth into and say, I like this, I don't like that, and it's a really good starting point. And the boundary that you see recommended tonight in your report was not the one that we began with. The biggest thing to consider with this exercise is the biggest thing that we had to consider as staff is, with the limited enrollment and confines of the new school, a 7 to 12 high school, should we include the Findlay Creek community with Riverside South? Findlay Creek is the one a little further east on the screen. And it's quite a large, significant and growing community. And we did debate long and hard whether or not that that Findlay Creek community should continue to be directed to Ridgemont High School and left out of this boundary, or whether or not it could be included. Certainly the result of the consultation did indicate to us that while they are two distinct communities, they functioned in a lot of ways back and forth as a growing center to the south of Ottawa. And so we think at the end of the day, it is appropriate, and it is a possibility to accommodate the Findlay Creek community within this boundary. Currently, the Riverside South students attend either Maryville High School or South Carleton High School to the largest degree. And so with the boundary that you see before you on the screen, we did have to amend those other high school boundaries. When it comes to Maryville, certainly we heard from the community that they did not enjoy the commute from Riverside South up to Maryville, although they did very much like the high school. And with the growth of IB at Maryville, having this area hive off to be accommodated in Riverside South really does give it some of the relief it needs. We also take a portion from South Carleton High School. It's impacted both by the construction of this high school and of Stittsville High School. So there are changes afoot for South Carleton. These were not unanticipated changes, and really, when you look at the reasonableness of some of children being accommodated in their own community, we think that this is an inevitable alternative here. So while South Carleton will be impacted, and that's certainly reflected in the numbers that you see at the back of the report, we also are mindful that there is growth in the Richmond community that will help South Carleton in the long term. We do have Finley Creek, as I mentioned, directed up Bank Street to Ridgemont High School. Ridgemont enrollment has really grown over the last number of years. It's not a huge high school, and currently it's almost at 90% enrollment, so it's quite robust. And when you look at where those kids come from, not a lot of the students do come from the Finley Creek community now. So we are looking at this in terms of it being a fairly robustly enrolled school to begin with, and the Finley Creek community growing to an extent that Ridgemont wouldn't be easily able to accommodate them to begin with. And they have noted that they're very attached to the Riverside South community. In this report, we've provided a new sort of summary that certainly I found helpful. I hope you did too. And it shows the changes that are anticipated at high schools in chart form, and you'll find that on folio 8. The grade structure that we are recommending, I'll note that now because we are talking high schools. This is a 7 to 12 high school that is being constructed. We're recommending that it open with a grade structure of grade 7 through grade 10, and then grow a year each year subsequent to its opening until you have a full contingent, a full 7 to 12 school. We did have, I will note now, some comments from parents who were interested in seeing both grades 11 and 12 offered at the school immediately. And certainly we took into account from the academic side of things how difficult that might be, given that they are coming from other high schools that have their own course packages, and how with perhaps not as robust an enrollment or the history behind them, it would be difficult to offer those grades. So I can tell you with other 7 to 12 iterations of high schools, the new high schools, we have opened with a grade 7 to 9 format. This is the first one where we are recommending going to grade 10. And it was pretty much as a result of the feedback that we got as a result of the consultation. On the following folio, folio 9, there's a summary of changes to the elementary panel schools that are involved in this area. Obviously, because the high school is opening as a 7 to 12 school, the intermediate accommodations that exist in the area will change. So Steve McLean with a K-8 format, Vimy Ridge, K-8 format, and some of the other peripheral schools in the area will also have to change, and those new boundaries are reflected. With the change to Steve McLean, and actually, I should note one thing before we leave this map. Because Steve McLean will all of a sudden have room that it heretofore hasn't had in Riverside South, we were able to take in, as a result of the consultation, a small community that is just north of Earl Armstrong Road and east of Limebank Road, the Boothfield community. We were able to take that into the Steve McLean boundary as part of this recommendation to you. And so that's something that we think was very much reflected in this conversation with the community. If I could have the next one. The next change is one that, again, is accommodatable because of the change of grade structure at Steve McLean. This is the current Farley-Mowat Public School boundary. Farley-Mowat Public School is located in the Barhaven community west of the river. And because Steve McLean has always had accommodation issues, that large pink area to the east and to the east of the river And again, south of Earl Armstrong Road, Summer Hill community has always been part of the Farley Mowat community, but we have long heard from them that they wish to be schooled in their own community in Riverside South. And so that is also a change that we are proposing, that upon opening of this school, when the 7s and 8s move out of Steve McLean, it will be possible to change this boundary so that large area east of the river is accommodated in Riverside South at Steve McLean. It certainly does impact the Farley Mowat boundary, but not so much that it's damaging to Farley Mowat. We think it's still quite a sustainable school, but it's certainly reflecting the feedback that we've heard over the course of a number of accommodations in this area. And I think there was one more. That's the Steve McLean boundary that we're talking about now, including that little bump out along Earl Armstrong, the Boothfield community, and the larger portion of it south. There were other things that we could not quite solve. We do know that we've heard, if you wouldn't mind going back to the first one, please. We did hear from the area just south of this proposed boundary towards the river, kind of Manotick area, that they very much wanted to be included in this boundary. When you have to look at the numbers and decide what can be accommodated reasonably at this school before they burst at the seams, we were concerned that we could not take this area in. Again, a line has to be drawn somewhere, and that's where we sawed it off as staff as thinking it's the most reasonable and sustainable for this boundary. You also heard in delegations tonight that there were people, we heard at the public meeting that there were people who lived in Barrhaven and went to Farley Mowat Public School who wanted to be able to transfer into Steve McLean across the river and then access the new high school. We've also heard now, we didn't hear it so loudly during the public consultation, from parents who live in Riverside South, whose children do attend Farley Mowat at the moment, who have asked to be left at Farley Mowat, essentially grandparented there. We have not, in our recommendations, given one for extensive optioning or grandparenting here. We have recommended a block move of students from Riverside South from K to grade 5. We are not in the habit of moving kids in their last year at a school. So if you had a child moving into grade 6 in the last year of Farley Mowat, we certainly did talk about grandparenting those kids, but not the lower grades. And that is something that, again, we did consider because we do want to minimize disruption. But when you are starting with a new high school, you want to make sure that it is populated correctly and the feeders below it are populated correctly for its sustainability. And so our recommendation was a block move. As you will see with many new school openings, it's almost always a block move. The final thing that I bring to light is we did not make any recommendations with regard to MFI at this point in time. It was a difficult thing for us to do. Riverside South currently, that community is directed to Cars on the Rideau for MFI. The Finley Creek community is directed to Blossom Park Public School for MFI. We looked at creating an MFI program somewhere within the new catchment. And then we looked at what was left over at both Cars and the Rideau and Blossom Park. And we had concerns with the robustness of what would be all three programs. So there is a viable program. Neither one of them are bursting at the seams, but there's a viable program at Cars and the Rideau. There's a viable program at Blossom Park. To take away from those and create a third program, in our minds, created challenges. So we made no recommendations about those. We do know that that means that children who wish to attend an MFI program will likely be joining the Riverside South High School in grade 9, or they will be choosing other options and joining in grade 7. So It's a long report. I know it's a very detailed report. I'll try and answer any questions and leave my presentation at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ostapchuk. And I have trustee Jenkins as the first speaker on my list.
Thank you, Chair Scott, and thank you, Superintendent Giroir and Manager Ostapchuk for your fulsome report and your dedication at all the workshops and planning and going through all the different challenges that parents are facing. I'd like to move the recommendations, A through D, I believe it is. Can we put them on the board? Did you want me to read them through?
I think given the length, the volume of these recommendations, as is so often the case with extensive attendance boundary recommendations, there's an awful lot of text there. So I'm not sure whether it will be best to try to display them on the screen or simply to put them, to read through them. And for the benefit of people who, when they're on the screen, may have difficulty reading them there, perhaps it would be worthwhile reading them all
For me
out.
to read. And just before I read them, I can happily say that the shovels are in the ground and there's lots of action going on at the corner of Earl Armstrong and Spratt. So thank you very much. Okay, so A, that the new Riverside South School open in September, the year it is completed for occupancy as a grade 7 to 12 secondary school, initially offering grades 7 to 10 to grow a grade per year thereafter until offering a full grade complement. B, that the boundary of the secondary school as shown in Appendix B be drawn from the current 7 to 12 boundaries of Maryville High School, South Carleton High School, Osgood Township High School, Ridgemont High School, Brookfield High School, Gloucester High School, in accordance with Appendices F, G, H, I, J, L. C, that any grade 11 and 12 students upon entering of the new Riverside South School, secondary school attending Maryville High School, South Carleton High School, Osgood Township High School, Ridgemont High School, Brookfield High School, and Gloucester High School shall remain at their current high school with transportation provided if they are eligible under the Student Transportation Policy P.127 TRA and Procedure PR 556 TRA. D, that the boundary for Farley Mowat Public School be amended as reflected in Appendix C to bring that portion of its current boundary east of the Rideau River into Steve McLean Public School catchment. All students grades K to 5 will be expected to block move to Steve McLean Public School upon opening of the new Riverside South Secondary School. Students entering grade 6 upon opening of the new Riverside South Secondary School may remain at Farley Mowat Public School with all transportation provided if they are eligible under Student Transportation Policy P.127 TRA and Procedure PR.556 TRA. Recommendation E, that the grade structure for Steve McLean Public School be amended to a K to 6 grade format and the boundary be amended as reflected in Appendix D. Recommendation F, that the grade structure for Vimy Ridge Public School be amended to a K to 6 grade format and the boundary be amended as reflected in Appendix E. And lastly, recommendation G, that the boundary for South Carleton High School be amended as reflected in Appendix F.
And I hate to tell you this, trustee Jenkins, but there are a few more parts.
Okay, I'll take a sip of water. You're absolutely right. There's more.
So I think we're starting with H.
That's why I like good old fashioned physical hard copies of things. Okay, H, that the boundary for Osgood Township High School be amended as reflected in Appendix G. I, that the boundary for Maryville High School be amended as reflected in Appendix H. J, that the boundary for Ridgemont High School be amended as reflected in Appendix I. K, that the boundary for Brookfield High School be amended as reflected in Appendix J. L, that the grade 7 to 8 English program with core French and early French immersion attendance boundary for cars on the Rito Public School be amended as reflected in Appendix K. M, that the boundary for Gloucester High School be amended as reflected in Appendix L. And that students in the area bounded by Rito Road to the north, Limebank Road to the east, Mitch Owens to the south, and the Rito River to the west that are impacted by the opening of the new Riverside South Secondary School. One, students residing in this area upon opening of the new Riverside South Secondary School be given a one-time option to remain at or choose to attend Maryville High School, Osgood Township High School, or South Carleton High School, and be provided transportation if they are eligible under Student Transportation Policy P.127 TRA and Procedure PR .556 TRA. And 2, students not residing in this area upon opening of the new Riverside South Secondary School be directed to attend Osgood Township High School or South Carleton High School and be provided transportation if they are eligible under Student Transportation Policy P.127 TRA and Procedure PR 556 TRA. And O, that any student on a cross-boundary transfer at a school whose program cohort is being relocated to another school as a result of approved recommendations in report 23-048 be allowed to move with their program cohort without having to reapply for a transfer. Thank you.
Bravo. So that is the motion that is on the floor. And I have trustee Kaplan-Murth as our next speaker.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Chair. I actually just had a question about when the block transfers occur between schools in terms of special education programs, and are there the same special education services provided if there were students in one school who are then transferred to another school? Do those go with them?
Madam Chair, we understand that that is the case. They will all be accommodated. And actually, in making this decision at this point in time, it does allow for not only the special education students, but all students to be given a bit of lead time. The principals at both the receiving schools and the sending schools are really good about orientation when you give them enough time ahead of time. And so I'm sure that sort of thing will be accommodated also.
Thank you.
And next I have trustee Lyra.
So I was looking at the Steve McLean Boothfield extension, and I'm wondering if that's a community that is still growing and if it might land us in hot water should they add another row of houses or another street if we don't want to extend that out to the whole block.
It's a fairly confined area, the Boothfield one that you're referring to. There isn't any other development that is proposed at this point in time, but I think we can obviously see with all the provincial directives and everything, there will likely be a closing of that gap at some point in time between Riverside South and Finley Creek. And we're going to have to do some fancy stepping at that point in time to ensure we can accommodate kids. Boothfield is not going to be the thing that makes or breaks this particular boundary in either Steve McLean or Riverside South ultimately.
So I guess my question is, do we want to future-proof ourselves by making the Steve McLean boundary that whole block, knowing that we're expecting to see infill likely in that area given the provincial directives? Because I don't want to end up with a community that a couple of years down the road has been infilled and is going to two different schools because we didn't think ahead.
Understood. It has been impacted by the pandemic, but you will probably recall that at the end of the school year, we often do, as a planning department, a number of cleanup boundary amendments. We haven't done that in the last few years because it hasn't been necessary, but we do try and get out ahead of at the draft plan approval stage for plans of subdivision. We do oftentimes make those sorts of changes at that time before anyone has moved in and any kids are actually impacted. So I think that's a better way to deal with it as we go on, because it allows us to respond better to development as it occurs.
Makes sense to me. Thank you.
And next I have trustee Presley.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm extremely impressed by the work and attention that's gone into this report. I will be voting in favor, and I would encourage my colleagues to do the same.
Other speakers to the trustee Milburn, and then Ms. Lyon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions about, more as a new trustee as well, about once the boundaries are confirmed for the new Riverside South School, how are we planning to inform parents and children's that are going to be enrolled at early ages that might be expecting to go to a new school? And sorry if I missed the microphone. I was looking behind me.
To that question, as I implied in the answer to Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, when we get good lead time with this sort of thing, we're well practiced in getting out there to the communities with communication. This was also a really well attended consultation, by the way. It was the first live one that we've had, like in-person one, for the last number of years. And we had quite a number of people come. There's also the chance that with growing communities, you're going to have somebody moving in who wasn't involved in the consultation. They just weren't there. But all of the schools will be given all sorts of information to go home to parents. And certainly, as I said, when we have this lead time, one of the things that the sending and receiving schools are really, really good at doing is communicating with others, communicating with each other and with parents, and giving opportunities for orientation. Teachers often consult one another to track kids. And so that's one of the things that I think the schools do really well. And so they will be prepared upon a decision being made with this. And given it's not supposed to open until next September, they do have very good lead time.
Thank you for the answer. And I can say that I am extremely happy to see all of the public engagement and consultation that has gone in to drawing these boundaries, and I will be excited to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Milburn. Ms. Lyon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I know as a veteran of the accommodation review process and a long time colleague, I guess I can say now, of Karen's, I'm happy to see the robustness of this report. I know that this is of great interest to many parents anytime there's a change in boundary or a new school opening. My question has to do with the grandfathering and the delegations, the written delegations that were submitted this evening that those people didn't have a chance to present in person. And I note on folio 9 that Steve McLean Public School, after the opening, will still be at 122.2% capacity, while Farley Mowat Public School will be at 63.5% capacity. So is there an opportunity to revisit the issue of grandfathering for those families that want to remain at Farley Mowat?
Madam Chair, through you, it is not impossible to look at that. It has not been our practice to grandfather other than those grades that we think are pivotal to remain. And so we've made the allowance. Obviously, we don't want children going to 3 schools in 3 years. That's a practice that we always try and avoid. So those children in grade 5 going into grade 6 at Farley Mowat, we've left in place at Farley Mowat. When you grandfather or give one-time options for people to pick and choose, and remember, we've heard from Barrhaven families who want to go to Steve McLean and then access the high school. And we have heard from those parents in Riverside South whose children go to Farley Mowat and wish to remain there. That has quite a long phase out, if you will, if you allow kids in. There are children who are in kindergarten all the way to grade 5. And so while it is theoretically possible to do so, it's also something that is of concern when it comes to things like busing situations. It's not that the kids in Riverside South might not be bused to Steve McLean, but it does eliminate the routing of both going to Steve McLean and going to Farley Mowat when you have half of them making a choice to go here and half of them making a choice to go there. The way that we've addressed this in this report, and I'm here to certainly listen to the feedback, is that we have long heard, like over and over and over again, that this Summerhill community is obviously part of Riverside South, and they very much want to be attached to the Riverside South school. There are some exceptions to that rule. You've heard from them in delegations. We do think in those circumstances where there are compelling personal reasons to look at this, that there is a transfer policy to avail yourself of. It does not come with transportation. I would note that. I don't want to mislead people, but that a block move is really the way to try and establish this as part of the new community. So that's why we've recommended it this way.
Other speakers to this motion? Seeing none, I will ask Trustee Nash if you wouldn't mind taking the chair, please.
Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
Thank you. I did have a question with regard to the opening grade structure of grade 7 to 10 for the new Riverside South Secondary School. When the decision was made to establish the grade structure for our new high school being built in Stittsville, the recommendation and the decision was grade 7 to 9 for a variety of what at the time were very sound reasons. However, since the delays have happened with getting that school completed, and we now have a whole year's worth of grade 9 students who would have been at the new high school if we'd been able to open it this September, who now are not going to be able to attend the new school unless we change the opening grade structure. Is there any possibility of monitoring those numbers to see whether we would in fact have a cohort large enough to support a solid grade 11 and 12 program when they get over and get it older and into higher grades, and change that previous decision to make it also a grade 7 to 10 opening grade structure, the way we're planning for Riverside South?
Madam Chair, I would defer to my board services colleagues when it comes to revisiting the particular decision that was made. But that aside, we can certainly have a look at those numbers. When we've had a brand new 7 to 12 school opening, we have opened historically 7 to 9 and been able to grow a grade a year. This time, for the first time, we are recommending in Riverside South to open 7 to 10. It was thought, and the feedback that we got was that was a doable grade structure as far as delivery of program, and certainly a robust program. I think the thing that we would have to look at in Stittsville is, again, it sort of speaks to what I've brought up before in this report. You'd have to look at a block move. And so that would mean that children who are settled in a grade 9 program at some school now would be compelled to move to a new school for grade 10. I don't think there could be any back and forthing about that. You would need the whole of that group to go as a block in order to have that robustness of class offerings at the grade 10 level. And so that might be fraught with a bit of difficulty. I'm not sure. Certainly, you know your community better, and I have heard the same thing from the community due to the delay. But it was something that we'd certainly have to consider. And it's not just the grade 10 program that I'm worried about. I would be more concerned to make sure that those numbers were there for the depth of programming as they grew a grade a year for 11 and 12. So.
Thank you very much for that response. I am pleased that it is going to work to have grades 7 to 10 at Riverside South, or at least that's the current expectation. And will be pleased to support the recommendation.
I give you back the chair.
Thank you. And if we have no other speakers, then I will go to Trustee Jennings for wrap up.
Thank you, Chair Scott, and thank you for the questions. Thank you, Ms. Lyon, for your question. Certainly, Finley Creek and Riverside South are very much growing communities. You addressed the community of Summerhill, which is my neighborhood, and for years, families have been unhappy that they haven't been able to attend Steve McLean. So I'm sure they're going to be very happy about that. Anyway, I encourage my fellow trustees to vote in favor of the recommendations. Thanks.
And that brings us to the vote. Are we doing I'm out of practice chairing committee of the whole. Are we doing a show of hands vote? So I will ask the question. Does anyone need the recommendation read again? If we're good on that, I will call the question then. All those in favor? Carried.
Can you see my
Thank
hand?
you very much. And that brings us, I think, directly on to our next item of business, which is Report 23-061, and this is the new Finley Creek Elementary School study, the consultation plan for approval. Mr. Director.
Once again, through you, Madam Chair, we'll turn it over to Associate Director Giroir and staff.
And through you, Chair, I will turn it over to the Manager of Planning.
It's a shame there isn't somebody else to turn it over to. Thank you very much. We're here this evening to obtain your approval going on to board for a consultation process that we've outlined for yet another consultation in this community in the Vimy Ridge at Vimy Ridge School, looking at creating a boundary for the second Finley Creek Elementary School. Thank you very much. So the map is up there for you to consider. You'll see the little Boothfield community. It's sort of hashed out there. Hopefully it will be taken care of as part of the previous report. But right now that community is indeed part of Vimy Ridge's boundary. What we're looking at is building that second elementary school. It is directly to the south of Vimy Ridge. And so we have proposed a boundary in this report. Unfortunately, because we have two schools on one side of Bank Street, it's going to end up with a different boundary, one that takes in some of the area east of Bank Street. But I know that the community at Vimy Ridge is anxious to have this school open and is anxious to have this boundary set. And so they're all very much looking forward to this. We have included, just so you know, because of the overcrowding currently at Vimy Ridge, some of you will recall an interim measure that was put in place some time ago, that any new families who are moving into the Finley Creek area, depending upon their children's grade at the time that they move in, are either directed K-6 to Robert Bateman, which is directly up Bank Street, or for intermediate studies are directed to Roberta Bondar, which is adjacent to Robert Bateman. We have included those schools because there is community impact there, but by and large, the great preponderance of the consultation will take place with existing Vimy Ridge parents. The way that we've structured this is very similar to the way we did for the Riverside South High School, the way we do all our consultations, with a number of working group meetings with a membership on a panel that is focused, so representation from the schools involved and the community associations. And as I said, they're all well practiced in this area of coming to these meetings already, so we expect good participation. And they will be looking at trying to refine a boundary to go out to a larger public meeting, which we hope to schedule. It's unfortunate the way the timing goes, but it almost always ends up in December to have this larger public meeting. Nonetheless, they tend to be well attended. And the ideal would be to come back to you early in the new year with a recommended boundary, so that can all be put in place for the following September. So I'll leave it at that and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Manager Ostachuk. And first speaker on my list is Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Scott, and thank you again, Superintendent Giroir and Manager Ofsachuk for your report. And I'd like to move the recommendation that the new Finley Creek Elementary School Study Consultation Plan and Timeline attached as oh, it just snapped out of me here. Thank you. As attached, Appendix D to report number 23-061 be approved.
Thank you very much. No further introduction?
Thank you, Chair Scott. So the community of Finley Creek, the families and students at Vimy Ridge Public School have been quite challenged at 200% student population. The staff and educators at the school have been fantastic. The principal and vice principals have done a remarkable job considering the challenges with such a student population size. So the community is desperately needing this new elementary school to be built, and I look forward to seeing the shovels in the ground for that one as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. I just noticed a discrepancy between the map that was shown on the screen and the map that's in Appendix B in our report. The one in our report has a hash over the Boothfield neighborhood. It was the intention to have there be a hash, which usually represents an option choice for that neighborhood in the.
Just to clarify, Madam Chair, we've noted it as such on this map because currently that area, you draw a straight line and that is Vimy Ridge. If the report on the Riverside South High School is approved, it will no longer be in that boundary. It's really not, I certainly don't wish to imply that the people who live there are not germane to Vimy, but we're trying to reflect their wishes in the first report. It's a little complicated, a little chicken and egg, but we think it'll be concentrated on the east end of this boundary.
I understand. Thank you. In reports previous, we used the hash to represent choice areas in the past, and I was confused by that. Thank you for the clarification.
Further discussion on this report and recommendation? And I'm not seeing any hands raised, not even online. So back to you, Trustee Jenkins, for wrap up.
No wrap up required. I just encourage, I guess, my colleagues to vote in favor. Thank you.
And I will call the question on the recommendation. All those in favor? And those opposed? And the motion is carried. Thank you very much. And that brings us to item 8.3, notice of motion regarding air quality standards and guidance for public school buildings. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'm just today giving notice that I will move I'm not sure if this is saying that I'm supposed to be moving now or that I will move later, but anyway, that I move in keeping with section 12.9 of the board's bylaws and standing rules, whereas the triple threat of respiratory viruses in Ontario, including COVID-19, RSV, and influenza, can affect student health, school attendance, and overall well-being, whereas data from Ontario indicates higher and disproportionate rates of COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations among lower income and racialized communities, whereas schools as congregate settings can continue to play a positive and proactive role in reducing the spread of respiratory viruses, whereas ventilation is one strategy to help reduce the number of contaminants in the air and improve indoor air quality, and whereas the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers and American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers have recently released recommendations and standards to improve indoor air quality in existing buildings. Therefore, be it resolved, A, that the chair write to the Minister of Education, including the Ontario Public School Boards Association, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Ontario Chief Medical Advisor, and Chair of Public Health Board, requesting One, that we have updates to air quality standards and guidance for public school buildings to support schools in creating the safest possible learning environments. Two, that we have dedicated capital and operating funding envelopes for reducing the spread of illness in schools. These are to A, build from previous provincial investments to support ventilation improvements to build long-term improvements to air quality in all our schools. And B, to support continued public health promotion activities in and around schools in partnership with Ottawa Public Health. So then back to B, that the director present a report to the board of directors prior to the end of 2023 on one, ventilation related investments, challenges and opportunities, and two, other opportunities related to reducing respiratory viruses in schools.
And did you have any further introduction?
So I think we have ample evidence, and I can provide you with the documents if you wish to support the importance of monitoring and improving our air quality, not just from a public health standard in terms of virus spread, but also in terms of particulate that we've experienced with climate change and poor air quality due to that. So I can provide any colleagues who would like it with those documents. There's extensive research and support for improved outcomes in schools when we have improved air. And this is merely asking us to write a letter to, as I said, to those in our provincial government, and asking for some sort of support and commitment to improving air quality. So I hope that that is not too big of an ask, and that that we can work together to ensure that both for our students as well as our staff, we have the highest possible quality air that everybody is breathing all day. And that's for part A. And for part B, I think that, you know, we have already seen commitment from our district to working on improvements in ventilation in our schools. And I think there's possibly already some work being done in terms of assessment of that, evaluation of what we can do. So this shouldn't be a very large ask in order to have a report on that. I think also that the fact that the Toronto District School Board as well as the Waterloo District School Board have approved a very similar motion should unite all districts in Ontario in asking for the same. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go to the speakers on my list, I will ask if there's any comment from staff.
Through you, Madam Chair, appreciate the motion brought forward from Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Just to add as context, the district indeed has received a memorandum from the Ministry of Education following up on two associated items. One is an update on ventilation guidance and best practices with a focus for some additional funding that's been provided, in particular around kindergarten classes that don't happen to have mechanical ventilation across the province. It's sometimes some of the kindergarten rooms, so they might include HEPA filters, that kind of thing. So a bit of a guidance and best practice update from the ministry in addition to some additional funding, as well as aligned with the motion as brought forward, standardized school ventilation measures reports that the district's required to provide to the Ministry of Education this fall. So it would be aligned in spirit with work already taking place across the district.
Thank you very much, Director. And on my speakers list at the moment, I have Trustee Aziz, Trustee Presley, and Trustee Lee. Trustee Aziz.
Apologies, Chair. I believe it was Trustee Lyra, Trustee Aziz. No, you okay? I apologize. I wanted to make sure I wasn't cutting the queue. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just updating my notes based on what the director had just said. At first I'll say I agree that writing letters to the province regarding these kinds of issues is important. I appreciate the memo from the information from the director regarding a memo on new guidelines for kindergarten, is that what I heard correctly? One of the elements, and sorry, if I can ask Director, through your chair, was the memo about updated provisions all around regarding air quality, or was the kindergarten classroom ventilation a part of the memo that included a number of other issues on various other topics?
Through you, Madam Chair, that latter comment is correct. It was one of a number of pieces. Kindergarten classes is just one example where some additional support was provided with the funding, but it's not solely that. It's across the system, system-wide in terms of those two updates for the current school year. So it's not solely the items I mentioned. Those are just two examples.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Director. I will say I had inquired about air quality and CO2 monitoring in the last school year, and if I may, Chair, through you, follow up with the facilities on those questions. In February of last year, we received the facilities renewal program and school condition improvement 2022 to 2023 project plan. I was wondering if I could ask, sorry, if and when the board will receive an update on that plan, and subsequently if we can receive a detailed update regarding HVAC and air quality.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn that over to our Associate Director, Giroir, just for a comment on follow-up from last school year.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair. So the staff are working to put together a report on all the projects that we completed over the summer on the FRP and SCI capital plan that we proposed. So the target date for that report to be presented to board is October. So I will keep you informed if that changes, but right now the priority is to finish off the remaining jobs that we started over the summer period that are still going on in the schools. But the team are absolutely working on, because that is part of that report. That there's not many jobs left, but there are a couple of jobs left. But so I don't feel like there's any risk that we won't be able to provide you that report in October, but I'm just, that's the plan. The second question, during budget, we did commit to providing you a report on ventilation and HVAC upgrades. So, and the motion here says by the end of the year. That's a reasonable timeframe for us to provide you that report. It will tie in with the report that we're providing the province that they just put out in the memo. So it all ties together. So I think that would give us enough time to provide you a more fulsome report on the work that we have done and the work that we continue to plan to do, and where we stand with the new ASHARE I don't know what they call them, guidelines or standards that they put in place. My manager of facilities tells me that the majority of systems that we do have in the schools right now just need a little bit of tweaking to meet the new guidelines. And we're in the process of making those adjustments now, but the report will provide much more details on those sort of things.
If I may ask a follow-up, Chair?
Well, you've still got a minute and a little bit on the timer.
I'll take it. Thank you very much. And if I may ask a follow-up in the motion, part B, part 2, it says other opportunities related to reducing respiratory viruses in school. Through you, Chair, if I may ask a follow-up to looking at a similar CO2 monitoring pilot that we see at being developed or being discussed at WRDSB. The motion was tabled there during the last school year, and I'm wondering if updates on a possible pilot at the OCDSB can be put together briefly in the October report, or if in the October report we can have that discussion in more fulsome context.
Sure.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll have a look at that along with staff and follow up either in the October or later in the school year, but I'll turn it over to Associate Director Giroir for a comment.
So CO2 monitoring, I would not want to address it in October report. I'd prefer to address it in the report that we provide, a more wholesome HVAC and ventilation type report to you. I have discussed this in depth with my staff already. We do CO2 monitoring by building right now. We do not do it by classroom. There's pros and cons, and there's a lot of there's some research by AdShare, or the provincial body, that does set those standards, saying that CO2 monitoring by classroom is not as effective. There's a lot of reasons why levels spike in a classroom. It could be a gym class. There's a lot of reasons why, right? Could be an exciting activity. Could it be, and it's not a good indicator of the true air quality of the classroom just because you have spikes and lows. The better method of managing CO2 levels within schools is monitoring the entire school with the systems that we have. And that's the investment that we kind of already gone down that road. So to pivot that strategy now and try to implement new equipment would need to be investigated on whether it's cost effective or makes sense. But that will be all contained in a more wholesome report that we provide you in before the end of the year.
If I may, one last follow-up, Chair, with 39 seconds on the clock. Thank you, staff, for the fulsome responses. That was chef's kiss, what I was looking for. My last question would be to separate the motion into two parts, because the motion to write a letter to the province, I think to the province Minister of Education, et cetera, might be more useful after we've received these updates, in terms of what is needed in more detail, having a discussion with staff. If it's something that other boards are doing other than the other two, I'm wondering if that's a conversation we can have.
Rather than separating the motion, if what you want to do is to have the letter happen after we have more information, it might be preferable for you to amend the motion to have the letter go by when, if we're getting more information in October, for example, to have the letter go at the end of October as opposed to immediately. And that would be a simple amendment to this motion, which you could make, rather than splitting it up, having that part fail, and then having to bring it back again later. So that would be my suggestion if you want to do that.
Thank you, Chair. I heard the timer go, so maybe I could be put on the second time speaker, or if you'll allow me to propose an amendment.
Well, since you started on this request in your current speaking time, I could let you go, or you might want to think about exactly what wording you want to put in and come back on as a second time speaker. And everyone now knows that that's an amendment you're thinking about. So with that, I will move on to our next speaker, Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Many of the questions I was going to ask have been answered by the director and by Associate Director Gerrois. I'm really happy to hear that we will have a report in October, and I'm happy to hear that the spirit of the motion is aligning quite well with the work that's underway in the board. I do have one amendment, if that is all right. In section B, it states that the director present a report to the board of directors prior to the end of 2023. Withstanding any amendments that my colleague Trustee Aziz may make, I would like to remove the wording after the board of directors, just so it's a bit more concise and it's clear.
That should be a clarifying thing. Is this amendment a friendly amendment? Is there any objection? Trustee Lee, you're okay? And
yeah,
yes, I
later.
know your hand is still up.
Yeah.
So you're removing the words of directors following the word board. So that is friendly. Anything further, Trustee Presley?
No, Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to Trustee Lee on the motion as it stands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As an engineer, always happy to support ventilation and capital projects and always asking for money for that. In terms of the reporting, question for Associate Director Sherwa. In the last couple of months, I've helped a couple of parents find this information, and I'm not sure if the district staff will be updating it, but there was a standardized school ventilation measures report that was last published in September of 2022 that detailed a lot of this information on HVAC and ventilation school by school and what projects and upgrades have been done to it. Some parents have asked whether they're going whether the district intends to update that report file soonish, I guess, in order to get a better sense of what's been done at their school.
Associate Director.
Through you, Chair, I would be happy to update the website with maybe not an identical report, because I don't know how that report compares to the current report we're preparing for the minister, but I will definitely prepare something for the website that can be posted that will provide parents with information about the upgrades we've done to their school over the past couple of years and the current ratings and things that I'll provide the information that we can to parents so that they have that information for sure, 100%.
Awesome. That's all from me, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. I have two questions. My first question, I think, is a question of responsibility for any board, and that is how much time and money and effort is this report going to take to change from what we are owing the ministry to what we would have to then provide to the board? Are we going to get the exact same piece as the ministry, or is it going to take us 100 hours, 10 hours to change it to what is being asked for?
Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll rely again on the Associate Director for a perspective on the delta between what's the requirement through the memorandum from the ministry and what additional elements would come from the motion as written.
Through you, Chair. I think that the memorandum from the ministry, I haven't had a chance to digest the spreadsheet and all the requirements that need to be input into the spreadsheet to give you a fulsome answer on that. So I know my team has that information and we are responsible to provide a report to the ministry, I think on the 29th of September, and they're working on it now. So that's kind of where we sit with that. So I think I can provide you a better update once my team has had more time to, because we only got a couple of days notice. That memo literally just came out a couple of days ago. And so I forwarded it off to them right away, but I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk to them in detail about the response.
So it sounds as though we may have the answer by the time of our board meeting.
Okay. Could we get a commitment from staff that we will have an answer to that question by board?
Yes.
Okay. My second question is the timeline reasonable? So the motion commits us to a report by the end of the year. Is that a reasonable timeline to demand something of staff?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think just based on the nature of the motion and the comments from the Associate Director and staff, I'm confident that with the October report and the end of the calendar year, I think we'll be in shape to be able to provide fulfill the motion as noted.
All right. Thank you. Those were both of my questions.
And that brings us back to Trustee Aziz. Do you have some language for an amendment?
Thank you for your patience, Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their patience as I send the amended language to Manager Guthrie. Hopefully that'll be showing up on the screen. Oh my God, my face is on the screen. I'm not used to that still. Sorry. Thank you, Manager Guthrie, for bringing up the amended language. I would like to present the purple amended language that after the Board of Trustees receives an update to, I guess, not to and regarding, perhaps just regarding, sorry, Manager Guthrie. Update regarding air quality standards in the 2023-2024 school year. The chair write to the Minister of Education, including the Ontario Public School Boards Association, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Ontario Chief Medical Advisor, and the Chair of Public Health Board requesting, and then the rest of the language is the same.
So you're adding the words that are in purple there.
Yes, ma'am.
And my question to everyone around the table who can vote, is this amendment friendly? If there is an objection, raise your hand. But if you're okay, and it looks as though it is accepted as friendly. Thank you, trustee Aziz. And I have no other speakers on this motion, so I'm back to trustee Kaplan-Murphy for wrap-up, please.
I don't think any wrap-up is necessary. Thank you.
And with no wrap-up required, we can go directly to the vote. I will ask all those in favor of the motion as amended. And those opposed. And the motion is carried. And seeing that we are now at 10 minutes to 9, I will call a very brief recess before we return to finish the rest of our agenda. But everybody probably needs a moment to stretch and Sorry, I'd like to call this meeting back to order again. We are now at item 9 on our agenda, reports from statutory and other committees. And the first one is that we need a mover to receive the report from the Special Education Advisory Committee or SEAC meeting of the 7th of June, 2023. Do we have a mover for that? Trustee Kaplan-Murth, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in this report? Trustee Nash.
Yes, thank you. I did see something in terms of the summer program, and it referenced a number of $6,000. I thought, well, that's an error. That was the special summer program. And I thought that must be an error. Sorry, I didn't highlight it very quickly.
And so that's something that, that's
Yes. 9 point under item
yeah,
9.
the bottom of
9.1.
page
Yes.
4 of the report in section 9.1A of that report.
Yes, because it says part of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board budget proposal is to reallocate approximately $6,000 that previously funded a summer learning program for special education. I don't know, was that reference to the summer program or the cost? Because that's.
Yeah, I think there is an error in the numbers there, and staff will follow up and make the necessary corrections so that it's accurate. Thank you for flagging that.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else in the report that is an error or an omission? If not, I will call the question on receipt of the report, subject, of course, to verifying that that is an accurate number. All those in favor? And those opposed, and that motion is carried. And now we are at items for discussion. Item 10.1, report 23-039, student suspensions. Mr. Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. I will turn this over to Superintendent Lehman and Executive Officer Giroux.
Great. Thanks. And through you, Chair. So I'm pleased to be here this evening with General Manager Rahim, Dr. Andrew Rahim, who is the General Manager of Reed and was instrumental, her and her team were instrumental in pulling the data that you've seen in the report. Just a little bit of a preamble before I turn it over to Andrea. One of the things you'll notice, obviously, is the 21-22 school year for the data pieces that are coming to you in September of 2023. So the intent was to bring this to Committee of the Whole and bring it to board in the spring. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get there. And so it's before you today or before you this month in September. Our goal moving forward would be to sort of stay in the cycle of the prior year. So by the end of June 2024, we would be presenting and sharing the information around the 2022-2023 student suspension data and the actions and the learning that we've taken from that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. Andrea is going to provide an overview of the data that was shared with folks, and then we'll turn it back over to me to talk about some of the action items and some of the learnings and next steps. So Andrea.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So as mentioned, this is our annual report on student suspensions, which we will be bringing forward on an ongoing basis. So this particular report looking at suspension data for 2021 to 2022. And we look at student suspension data in order to inform the initiatives that are designed to enhance safety and support the well-being of students and staff. This report focuses on the data for that particular school year of our 74,000+ students, showing that 1.5% of students were issued suspensions. Can I skip to the next slide, please? Thank you. The majority of those were issued were secondary students, and the majority of those were students who were suspended once over the course of the school year. Of the suspensions that were issued, we're looking at an 80-20 split of those that were mandatory versus discretionary, and the majority of suspensions issued were done so for a single day. Next slide, please. Overall, we see a decline in the 5-year trend, but there are a number of caveats on the data. For example, over this 5-year period, we have a number of considerations such as the pandemic, changes to students learning online, as well as changes in ministry regulation around suspensions in K-3. With those considerations in mind, we observe that suspension rates are lower for the 2021 to 2022 school year as compared to the pre-pandemic years. And that decline is reflected for most groups for which we have suspension and identity-based data, although noting that is a much smaller cohort as our identity-based data does get more out of date every year. And that for some identity groups, as outlined on page 4, students are suspended at a higher rate as compared to all students. But again, noting that this is a smaller group, which we'll be looking to rectify with some ongoing collection of identity-based data in the near future. So as a district, we will continue monitoring and using our suspension data alongside what we know from research and best practices around supporting learning conditions and creating safe spaces for students. And on that note, I will pass it back to Superintendent Lehman to describe some of that work.
Great. Thank you, General Manager Rahim, and through you, Chair. On the slide, you'll see some actions and next steps, which is sort of a brief overview that I want to chat about a little bit, information that you'll see in the report. And so the first one is really the work that we are doing and have been doing around creating learning conditions. So that work was initially created or developed in conjunction with learning support services, working closely with learning support services, working closely with our mental health lead around Dr. David Tranter's work around the 8 learning conditions. We began implementation in 2019. As we know, we've had some challenges over the course of the pandemic in being able to facilitate the professional learning in such ways that we would like. So we are continuing with that work. One of the things that we have done over the course of this summer and will continue over the course of this year is we have created kits, so to speak, around each of the 8 learning conditions that are fairly easy, self-explanatory, where educators can take an element of a kit. So for instance, a kit related to safety or sense of belonging, which are 2 of the 8 conditions, and use that with their students, use that in their assignment. That doesn't take an extensive amount of preparation time in order to implement. Same thing with principals and vice principals that we have ready made narrated slides. Again, not a slideshow with 20 slides, but 4 or 5 slides that we're trying to keep short, clear, and concise and practical in order to support educators. So we firmly have believed, and continue to believe, founded by research, that those learning conditions are critical for the success of our students. That is grounded in relationships. And the key around building and maintaining those relationships with our students and certainly with our learners. The other, critical elements of the work that we have done and continue to do is around getting to know our students, engaging our students in our courses and in our classrooms, and facilitating an enlisting voice. And having students see themselves as part of the curriculum, having seen students see themselves as part of that classroom, part of the course, and part of that school community is also another critical element. Some of the other work and actions that we have done and will continue to work on more recently over the course of the last year, 22-23, we implemented something called Safe and Caring School Leads. The purpose of Safe and Caring School Leads, we have 24 across the district. They are principals and vice principals who have volunteered to be in that position. They receive additional support from us in Safe and Caring Schools. Their role is supporting our 147 schools, are part of the support mechanism of the 147 schools when our principals and vice principals have questions related to safe and caring school matters. So sometimes reactive, but sometimes certainly proactive as well within that work. We're also updating, revising our bullying prevention and intervention plan for our advisory groups that are here and our parent involvement committee. We hope to be coming to you over the course of the next month or two in order to garner and get some feedback from you around the bullying prevention and intervention plan. And what you would like to see in there. We are also re-engaging in the work around restorative practices. That will be a major element of our bullying prevention and intervention plan. And some of the other things, I'll just quickly highlight a few of the other pieces of work that we've done and continue to do based around research. One would be the work around equity-centered informed trauma practices. That we engaged in particularly last year. Over the course of the last 3 years, we have as well an anonymous reporting tool for students that don't feel comfortable necessarily coming to an educator, coming to an employee in order to provide information related to safety, health, well-being, et cetera, of themselves or others. So that is a tool that we have employed and will continue to use. And that information goes particularly to the individual school. If the student identifies where they are from, that will go to the school and the school administrative team would follow up. Of course, we have used our school climate data information. 2 years ago, we surveyed students. Last year, we surveyed staff and parents and caregivers, guardians to garner their feedback as well. Again, that is data that individual schools use and we use as a system in order to make informed decisions. And a number of different pieces that we have endeavored to engage in and we need to continue to work on related to centering the student at the core of the decision making around our anti-hate protocol, work that we've done around anti-Semitism, work that we've done around anti-oppression and anti-racism that has been interrelated and connected through a number of learnings, mostly through our PA days that have been created by the district and certainly supported not centrally, provincially as well. So a brief overview of the some of the work that we've done and that we need to continue to do. We also understand that there are complexities around some of these student profiles that we are seeing within our schools. And as I say, we continue to work hand in hand with learning support services as well as our well-being lead to support those students, to support the school communities in best meeting the needs of those individual students. So with that said, Chair, I'll turn it back over to you and we'll be open to taking any questions from the report.
And as is usually the case, there's quite a list of people with questions, beginning with Trustee Aziz. And also on my list, I have Trustee Presley, Trustee Kaplan-Meier, Trustee Bell, Trustee Nash, and Trustee Lyra. And two of our non-voting representatives as well. So we will work our way through it. I remind people to try to be succinct in your questions and then everybody has more time. Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and I will provide you a heads up that I may need to be put on the second time speaker list if we have time. Thank you. Thank you to you both for this report. Appreciate the colorful graphics and the equity focused data as well. That's really helpful. My first question is perhaps an elementary one for a new trustee. If you could kindly remind me what the difference is between mandatory and discretionary suspensions. Please and thank you.
Through you, Chair. our discretionary suspensions are, and I'm listing them and I'll just share a few of them. But a discretionary suspension is a situation where a principal does not have to necessarily suspend, but keeping in mind the difference between mandatory and discretionary is we always look at mitigating factors. There are always mitigating factors in any of those pieces. So Section 306 of the Education Act does talk about, uttering a threat to inflict bodily harm on another person, being under the influence of alcohol, possessing alcohol or illegal drugs, et cetera. Those are discretionary suspensions under 306. And then under 310, I just want to make sure as I move through here, possessing a weapon, including possession of a firearm, using a weapon to cause or threaten bodily harm to another person, committing physical assault on another person that causes bodily harm, requiring treatment by a medical practitioner. So those are, just a quick examples between the differences between a discretionary and mandatory suspension.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, if I may ask a follow-up question. In the list of actions and next steps in the slideshow that was presented, I see improved data collection listed, and despite the detail of the existing data, I'm wondering if we collect, I see the Ed Act explains why a student would get a mandatory or discretionary suspension. So I'm wondering if we collect data for each student that receives a suspension or progressive discipline, if we take note of what the exact situation was and then what the suspension or progressive discipline took place.
So through you, Chair. In those situations where there is progressive discipline and may not result in a suspension, the principal or vice principal would take notes related to the individual situation. And in a particular situation where it does result in a suspension, again, the principal or vice principal will be taking their notes related to the matter in case that there were questions or there were further incidents that may be built on the initial incident of either the progressive discipline or the suspension.
And again, through your Chair, so currently we don't collect the details of why a suspension was taken place for that particular student, or we do? Sorry, I just want to clarify that.
So through you, Chair, I just want some clarification on the question. I believe that the trustee is asking if we look at the, let's say the mandatory reasons, if we collect each mandatory reason for the suspension. Is that what the trustee is asking?
Yes.
We currently do not break our data down that way, but I believe that we can capture it in that manner. Right now, the way that we capture it is through mandatory or discretionary.
Thank you. So in light of the actions and next steps listed on the slide, I'm wondering if, and as Manager Rahim mentioned that, this will be an annual conversation, if for the next report and following reports, we can have that detail about mandatory versus discretionary. I think the information and detail will help us better understand how and why students are having these instances, and then better understand how we can address those concerns in the future, whether it's for safe schools, whether it's interpersonal matters, and provide better support for our students if we have more data, which I feel like a broken horse when we have these conversations, but I think I mixed my metaphors there. But that's something I'm wondering I think would be of great help in understanding how we can better support our students who are struggling. I think when we get matters of suspension, we're dealing with students who are struggling more than students who are hurting more than anything. And I see my time is slowly ending on the timer, but I will kindly ask the chair that I be put on the second time speakers list. Could you hear any of that? I'm so sorry. I realized I was turned that way. Okay, thank you.
Moving on, then our next speaker is Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I just wanted to comment, I'm very pleased to see that staff has already addressed a desire to have data capture commencing as of the 5th of September for regarding exclusion pause for safety instances. I'm just wondering if it would be possible, not this moment, but maybe you know, in due time, to have a little bit of an indication of what the numbers of the exclusion pause for safety instances have been so far, keeping in mind that I know that we aren't actively keeping data on this until now.
Through you, Chair, we do keep data on that at this point. So, and we have reported on that previously. So our intent is to report on exclusion data as well. But the reason we didn't bring it in this report is there's a difference between the exclusion data that is non-disciplinary, so to speak, versus suspension data. So we are certainly happy to share that information. We will decide in terms of, I guess, we'll get direction in terms of how you would like that certainly shared. What is in the report is the ability to capture in real time the pause for safety or the exclusions as they're happening, and to track them more specifically and more intently within the system.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Madam Chair. That's all.
Moving on then to Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you for this report. It is quite detailed. Something that jumps out at me is the looking at suspension rates, that there was an increase by 6% for students with multiple exceptionalities. And I'm wondering whether when we're looking at the ways in which we are enacting suspensions, whether we need to be thinking about that from a special education perspective, and whether these are actually students with multiple exceptionalities who might have been not adequately served by us in terms of supports that they would have needed to thrive.
Through you, Chair. Certainly I can begin, but wondering if Superintendent Simmons may want to jump in here as well. You know, one of the things as we look at students with an exceptionality, students or they don't have an exceptionality, but they have an individual education plan. You know, we are always cognizant of that. We are cognizant of the fact of that if a student does have a designation, and you know, one of the primary things that we look at if we get to the point of suspension of the student, was the student able to understand the foreseeable consequences of their actions, and that is really a primary driver for us around an incident if it's gotten to the level of suspension. In some cases that they can, in some cases that they can't, and certainly that is determined by the expertise at the school level. But I'll ask Superintendent Simmons if he has anything to add, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I would just add that we are talking really small numbers, so a change of 1 or 2 makes a big difference in that percentage value as well. But the point is not lost on us that certainly for students with some exceptionalities over others, we always want to be looking at, if we think about behavior as communication, what is the child trying to communicate through that behavior? And what are the things that we can do as the adults in the building to try to support that learner in experiencing success in school on a daily basis?
Thank you both. And I guess sort of a follow-up is that what we see from the data is that there are still also some discrepancies in terms of other groups who have higher percentages of suspensions than others, including Indigenous students, students with learning disabilities, and trans-identified males. And so I just wanted to be sure that we're not only collecting this data, but that we would also be looking for ways to support these students.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question and the comment. By all means, that we would be doing that, and particularly around our work with, certainly different groups, with members of the Indigenous education team and support, having them provide some support to us, and then facilitating learning within the context of our schools as well, so that our staff are able to have a better understanding of, the needs and the profiles of different students. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Trustee Bell.
Great, thank you. And through you, Chair, I would like to express my gratitude for this report and all of the work that is underway to proactively address the needs of students, and also very pleased to see the downward trend on the number of suspensions. I have two questions, potentially related. The first, I see in the data that Indigenous peoples continue to have disproportionately higher rates of suspensions. And I'm wondering if someone could speak to how we are directly addressing the specific needs of those people in culturally relevant ways. And then my second question is, will the renewed Indigenous equity and human rights roadmap outline ways to address the numbers, our percentages of suspensions, and maybe do so in a way that outlines the number of suspensions as an accountability measure? Are we contemplating that? Is that something that could be possible? Those are my two questions.
Through you, Madam Chair, I will turn it over to Superintendent Lehman momentarily, and Manager Rahim. I think on the second part, I think there's tremendous value in the evolution of our roadmap to look at some of these factors. So Trustee Bell raises a very valid point that will integrate into some of the feedback and consideration in the next iteration of the continuation of the roadmap. I'll turn over to Superintendent Lehman.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Again, looking at the numbers, they are smaller numbers, regardless of the numbers that we're dealing with. We're, each individual student that we have to be cognizant of in how that we are best supporting them. So really more towards the first question for Trustee Bell is, the structure that Superintendent Smith and team has set up around having a member of the Indigenous education team closely connected with each of the superintendencies and closely connected with the work that needs to be done, we know, within the context of our schools. First of all, to assist with learning more about Indigenous education and Indigenous ways of knowing is certainly first and foremost a work that we need to be doing. So that will be work that we continue to advance and continue to do, and that will be connected to the roadmap 2.0 or whatever we're calling it.
Chair, and a quick follow-up. Could some examples, just a couple of examples of the culturally relevant practices that we're doing to negate the possibility of suspension, potentially healing circles, things like that? If those practices are in fact underway, could someone please speak to them?
Through you, Chair. So I certainly do know within the context of my family of schools and within Safe and Caring Schools, the role that work is happening. And the work is also happening in our superintendencies. So we have superintendency meetings once a month. That is critical work that is happening so that our principals and vice principals do have a fulsome understanding of the services and supports that are being offered. And then how that trickles down to the school-based level so that we can be proactive in the type of work in particular that that Trustee Bell is talking about. The other thing I would mention is around the work around restorative practices. And as we sort of re-implement that work in the district, we'll be working hand in hand with our Indigenous team to garner some learning from the work that they have done around restorative practices. Oh, I'll turn it over to Executive Officer Giroux as well. Thanks.
I'll just add, in the context of how this gets reflected when we look at the renewed roadmap, looking at the data is challenging. As the superintendent has explained, the data set is so small. Looking at restorative practices and other pieces is a really important piece for dealing with incidents. But where you'll see the strategies most effectively in the roadmap is in engagement and learning. So the better we do in engagement and learning, the more we're dealing with the students' needs and supporting the learning and well-being, and then we're not into suspension data. So I just say that because I don't want us to go to that conversation about the roadmap renewal with an expectation that we're going to see expansions in data as opposed to expansions in learning activities.
Trustee Bell, anything further?
Nothing further for now, except to say that I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Thank you. Continuing.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. Moving on then to Trustee Nash.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm often able to, and I see it as a privilege because I'm not busy during the day, and so I'm often volunteer for the suspension panels. And I'm pleased to provide that support. Please is an odd word because it's always a very difficult situation for the families, caregiver, staff, and the student involved. But something I do hear, because naturally, as you all know, suspension panels, we usually see them a couple of months or afterwards, and so the suspension has taken place. But something we hear as comments, which seems to be something and reoccurring, is when students are reintroduced into the schools, and sometimes that doesn't work as well as it should. And so I just wanted to bring that comment because it's something that I hear, and we're always looking to improve. So that's an area which I do hear about. It doesn't happen, like the student came back to school and he wasn't met by the appropriate staff. So I just want to bring that to your attention. But again, I just want to make the point that I take that role very seriously, and I very much appreciate the work of staff in preparing and in these panels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Nash. Did you have any comment, Superintendent Lehman?
Through you, Chair. Certainly, we think that is critically important, right? That a student that has been away, whether for a day or 2 days, or maybe a little bit longer, that there is a reentry plan, and that is part of our procedure, that there be a reentry plan for that individual student. And the goal as well, I mean, they certainly, an appeal hearing can be divisive, so it's critically important that we build that relationship back with that family if it has been severed in any way. So certainly great importance of reentry to make sure that student gets back into a good start returning to school.
Thank you. Moving on then, next speaker is Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. Building on what Trustee Nash said, I'm wondering if we collect the data on how many students who are suspended appeal to the superintendent level, and then further, how many students who are suspended appeal to the trustee level.
Through you, Chair. To the best of my knowledge, no, that we do not centrally collect that information. And I'm seeing Trustee Guthrie, or sorry, I'm seeing General Manager Guthrie nodding.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, we do have that data, and it can be provided to trustees in a memo if requested.
Could I also?
It has been provided in previous years.
Yeah. Could I also ask that it be included in this report moving forwards? so that we understand what percentage of our parents don't feel a suspension was fair. Because I think that's ultimately what an appeal says, is that the parent doesn't feel like the suspension was fair. So a second question is, in the resource implication section, it says that we have received, and it's got a dollar figure, until the August of 2023. I'm wondering if our central funding has stopped for data collection, or if this report just hasn't been updated to reflect the fact that it's now after August 2023.
There was a change in the way that the funding for identity-based data collection is provided. And so it used to be special purpose grant funding. It is now rolled into the GSNs. There is a variance in the amount, but there's also a change in the nature of our work. So it's hard to answer off the cuff that question, but yes, there's a change in the funding structure.
A change in the funding structure downwards?
I don't think that the amount in the GSNs, although I can't speak to it definitively, is the same as what we were receiving in the special purpose grants. I'll leave it at that. I think it's more complex than that, but that's what we can say without looking at it in more detail.
Okay, if we could get a follow-up on that as well, that would be appreciated. I do have a question about how we seem to have a lower set of suspension data, but anecdotally higher rates of behavioral incidences. And I'm wondering how we square that circle. If you have a comment, I'd appreciate it.
Through you, Chair, a great question. Keeping in mind this suspension data is from 21-22. Certainly anecdotally, what we have found over the course of the, I would say since COVID and 22-23 school year is greater dysregulation in numbers of individual students and in situations. I would like to think that, we have supported and that our staff are also, continue to work hard to implement a variety of different strategies. For instance, one of the things that we are working towards this year through PCL, People, Culture, and Leadership, and Health and Safety is having a number of staff trained in behavior management. Right, and systems. So again, sort of a critical element there that helps in support. But you are certainly correct in what I have seen and heard around greater dysregulation at times within the system.
So to build on that, we've seen greater dysregulation in the system. We've seen an increase in behavioral incidences, and that hasn't translated to suspensions. And you're saying that is because we have a greater training in our staff to make sure that it doesn't translate into suspensions. I guess I'm not clear on that link.
Through you, Chair, I certainly think that may be one of the reasons why that we're seeing that. I don't know all of the reasons necessarily, but I think that's a key critical element that we will continue to support. I think the training and the number of things that are in the report and that I had shared earlier, I think contribute to a more positive, supportive learning environment, even though there are cases of greater dysregulation. And so sometimes we hear about those cases, and it may not necessarily be that it's happening all of the time. We just hear about particular cases, right, of dysregulation.
So would it be fair to say that you have not lowered the bar for suspensions?
Sorry, Trustee Lyra, can you repeat the question?
My question was, would it be fair to then say that we have not lowered the bar or changed the bar for suspensions? We're not allowing behavior that in previous years would have gotten a suspension.
Through you, Chair, that is correct. We are not changing the bar.
Okay. Last question. I appreciate I think it was section 5, you talk about intersectionality and you say, we recognize intersectionality. This data doesn't talk about intersectionality. And so my question to you is why and when can we expect this data to reflect the intersectional nature of our student population?
So I can respond to that through you, Chair. One of the concerns with this data is that any of the data on suspensions that we're mapping onto our identity-based data is from 2019 to 2020. So for a large group of those students, that was data that was reported on their parents on their behalf if they were in a lower grade level, recognizing that some aspects of identity can change, recognizing that a large number of those students have aged out. So our numbers are getting smaller and smaller. When we start to look at intersectionalities, we're looking at even smaller groups of students. We are looking at another round of identity-based data collection and starting to map out when it's feasible to do that again. When doing so, we'll have more robust data that we can be looking at and digging deeper into better understanding some of these identity groups and how that works with the data. But for the current data sets, if you look at the final pages in Appendix B, anything that's sort of shaded in gray is an area that we want to exercise caution because the groups are so small, and you can see that's more boxes than not. So really recognizing the limitations with this data.
I do understand the importance of trying to make sure we can't have identifiable individuals. The bar we set in previous reports has been 5, and that's kind of the threshold. I do want to make sure that we are looking forward and will be collecting intersectional data as soon as it's feasibly possible.
Just to clarify, it's not a question of collecting intersectional data, because when we collect the data, we ask students or parents to identify all of the ways they choose to identify. The dilemma is reporting on intersectional data because the number of intersectionalities is so complex. And so the question is, how do we narrow and to what exceptionalities, right? What combination, it becomes a mathematical thing. What combination of intersectionalities are we interested in looking at? And what will happen when we look at those numbers? Because regardless of the data, we have 1,306 or 1,305 student suspensions in this data set. So the further down we go and the more we look at intersectionalities, the smaller the numbers get. And so we will always, let me rephrase it. If we do our job well and don't have a high number of suspensions, we will always have small data sets to look at, right? So there's always going to be that challenge, which is why I think we have to look at the trends, and we have to be cautious about the trends, because overall the trend line is coming down. But again, the numbers are so small that we don't want to overstate that. So we're always in this struggle about what does the data say, and are we overstating, or can we actually make that definitive statement or interpretation? I think the other piece that's important is we're looking at data out of the first year of COVID. And so it's a different set of circumstances. We will see, and you will, in your term, have this year or last year's data this year, and next year's, like this year's data. And that's the trend line for us to watch. And in that period, we will have the new data collection, and we will go further on the issue of an intersectionality. But what we have to get at is, what groups are we going to prioritize for intersectionality? Where do we think that's relevant to focus on? Because there are so many possibilities, and it just becomes a lot of work without a lot of information to change practice.
I appreciate the comment. My statement about still wanting to see the intersectional data remains. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. And I still have 3 first-time speakers on my list, and I'm also starting to be mindful of the time. But I will go next to Seema Lamba, representing the Advisory Committee for Equity.
Okay, thank you. I just want to start off with a question first. If we can just look at table 4, I just wanted to ask the question, when it says all students, number of students suspended, it says 1,083. And then if I go down and look at residing in lower income neighborhoods, it says 433. So if I actually looked at that, 433 over 1,083 is 40%. So am I interpreting that correctly, that 40% of those suspensions of 1,000 were residing in low income neighborhoods?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. And then so if we go to special education needs, excluded, gifted, that's like about 40% or higher than 40% as well of all the suspensions. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you direct me to which line you were on?
Like the special education, it's 472. So that would be over 40% too. So I feel like this data doesn't actually reveal that. Like when I saw 40% of lower income and then 40% of special education, or over 40% for special education, of all the number of students suspended of the 1,000, that's pretty high to me when we look at it. And so if I started going down these tables like that, for other groups too, I started seeing like, wow, like there was some aha moments that we still have major problems if that is the proportionate number of a certain group that is suspended. So that's my point. I'd like to, if it's possible, to see data like that. Sometimes the disproportionate and suspension doesn't really demonstrate like the extent of the disproportionality. I think it's useful. The other comment I just wanted to make is if we're looking at the multiple suspensions, I'd like to be able to break that down by the different equity groups as well, to see if it is the equity groups that are getting the multiple suspensions, more than one, as well, to see if that's where they are. And I wanted to reiterate a comment made by someone else about getting the reasons for the suspension. I think if you've heard me before talk about accountability, I think it's useful if a student is suspended, that the person suspending or panel or whoever be given a form and the rationales for that suspension. Why are they being suspended and why alternatives were not used? And I think that would be a good data collection to be able to look at. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Any response from staff?
Through you, Chair. So certainly a couple of things. One is that we have heard around the table about being more specific related to the reason around the suspension. So certainly we will dig deeper in gathering that information to help us as we move forward into further reports. And the second piece is that there are many times when alternative measures were put into place that maybe didn't work. So it's not that we necessarily didn't put alternative measures into place. As part of progressive discipline, we may be at a point where this has happened on multiple occasions. There's been education. There have been partial sort of removal of a privilege, and whether that ends up being maybe a recess, something as such, that we are at the point where and education has continued to be provided. We are at the point where we are looking at a suspension, or we do enact a suspension. So, we do endeavor to do that judiciously, folks, and understanding that a suspension can be very challenging for a student and a family, but I certainly do guarantee you as a system that we do that in a judicious manner.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Lehman and Ms. Lamba. And moving on to Lily Miller, representing the Indigenous Education Council.
Hi, thank you. Yes, thank you. It's nice to see the data like this. And just reiterating that the disproportionate amount of number of Indigenous students is concerning. Also concerning is that's already been said, but I'm reading the graphic attachment, and behavior that's deemed to be inappropriate should be viewed as an opportunity to understand the underlying needs of the student. And I love that that's great. But, there's that follow through. You're not collecting data on the reasons. You're not collecting data on what the needs are. And so you can't really meet the needs if you don't know what they are. Maybe on a I don't know, I think you're relying on the Indigenous team perhaps to do that. And maybe they need, I don't know if they're going to receive resources for that. But are you tracking the correlation between, because it's quite a worrisome for the Indigenous Council, are the students that don't graduate. So I wonder what the correlation is between these students who are suspended and then don't end up graduating. That's my first question. And then my other question is, I really loved how you said, it's going to be grounded in relationships, so that students can see themselves as part of the curriculum, the school, and the community. And I don't even know how many years now I've been asking this, but part of that is seeing themselves represented in the school staff, and would really love to see the data in that too at someday, to see how that's shifting, if it's shifting. And hopefully I know that's not what you're doing here, but it's related. And finally, just wondering about the graphics, like, thinking about equity and representation. Just curious why it's mostly white children in the, why you chose that for the graphics. It's important to really lift up, mind you, I know it's for suspensions, but these are smiling, happy kids, and it's a happy graphic. Just, things like that matter when people see stuff and, oh, I don't see myself represented in this, like that's a part of belonging too. So, yeah, those are my comments and questions.
Thank you. Let's see if we have some answers. Superintendent Lehman?
Yes, through you, Chair. First question around student that was suspended and then any correlation to graduation rate. Certainly, to the best of my knowledge, that is something that we haven't necessarily tracked. I'm looking to General Manager Rahim, and she's shaking her head. So I don't think that we have necessarily that data from a a board perspective. So certainly we'll take that into consideration to be looking at. But we do have students that we know are behind in credits, that are in risk of not graduating. And so certainly point well taken around some of the challenges or trauma along the way that may have impeded their ability to be able to certainly graduate. So certainly we'll take that under advisement. I think the staffing question again, I'm going to maybe wait a bit on that in respect to a response. We continue to work in hiring staff to support students of particular identities, and we have continued to, I think, build a really reputable and strong Indigenous team. I know it moves beyond the Indigenous team, and Superintendent Hall and her team continues to work on the expansion of and diversify our staff. And finally, around the graphic, certainly happy to have General Manager Rahim jump in and chat about that. I think that when I'm looking at that, and thanks for the question, when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at next steps and actions which are more certainly positive in nature than a punitive approach around the suspension. So I'm not sure if General Manager Rahim has anything she wanted to add.
No, other than thank you for the feedback, and we'll definitely be taking that into account when choosing our next graphics.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to student trustee Emma Hong.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just have a quick question about something that was mentioned in the presentation. I was wondering if there's any tangible examples of ways that students would be centered in making decisions on anti-hate initiatives. I think it was mentioned during the anti-bullying and bullying kind of ways to rectify issues and involve students in that process.
Thank you, trustee, for the questions. Great question, actually. And over the course of last spring, we engaged in some training around anti-hate training for our principals and vice principals, as well as our educators. And so, you know, I really think that we can use that framework as we bring it into the student level. And just so that I don't misspeak, I just want to reference something. And that protocol is you know, looking at disrupting, educating, supporting, and reporting. And I think that as educators, as we model that, and as we engage students in that process, that our students and our student leaders, and I think we all are, you all are student leaders, can certainly implement and be engaging in those conversations and modeling with others that you folks are allies and supports to all students, and that any type of hate, bias, prejudice, racism, et cetera, would not be tolerated. So I certainly think that we have some work to do there, student trustee, and I'm happy to certainly work with Student Senate and Student Co-President on that work, because I think that's a really great way of infiltrating it throughout the system with our students.
Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Hung. Now, last of our first-time speakers, trustee Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I guess my question is, I've sat on a lot of suspension. Sorry, I'm getting a really bad cold. And I wanted to know, with the with the charts and all the study, do we have how many, actually when they go through suspension, how many is overturned? And then secondly, why can't we come up with something before? Because I've noticed a lot get suspended and then the information wasn't gathered properly and they shouldn't have been suspended, but it still stays on their record. So I'm just wondering, how can we look at those data and see how many times and what students it really affects? Because what I noticed was a lot of the kids, like their last year of high school, that they were being penalized or being transferred to another school because it reached that point. So I'd like to see the data on that, and like real data, not like 2019, but like 2022.
Through you, Chair, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, I think what the trustee was seeking was the number of suspensions that went to appeal and the number that were overturned, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that we certainly would have that data that we can provide, and I think have provided in the past, if I'm not mistaken. So happy to do that. If a suspension is overturned, then the record would be, the letter would be removed from the student's record and would no longer be part of a student's record. And then finally, you know, the piece about a student moving from school A to school B, there is the rare occasion where that may occur. And again, that happens on a very, very rare basis. And sometimes it's initiated through the district. Sometimes it's initiated through the students and or parent or caregiver looking for a fresh start.
Anything further, trustee Dixon?
Nothing further, Chair.
Sorry? Okay.
Nothing further, thank you.
Nothing more. And we have still 2 second-time speakers. And given that we have other stuff on the agenda, I hope we can be pretty succinct here. So trustee Aziz and then trustee Kaplan. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We did have one more, first-time speaker. I had accidentally drawn a line through the wrong name here. And that is Suzanne Lyon for the Parent Involvement Committee.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Thank you for this report, Dr. Rahima. I'm beginning to expect excellence in data from you. I do have a question about identity-based data. And on page 3, section 8, paragraph 8, it says, for the portion of students who were issued a suspension in 21-22, identity-based data exists for 35%. So my question is, why is there not identity-based data for all students that are suspended? Why is that not collected? And if it's not, can it be going forward? And if it is, can we have that in the next iteration of the report? I also note that multilingual learners, I note the information about subsets of students who were suspended at a disproportionately higher rate than their population in the school system would suggest. And I find this very troubling. And that leads me to a comment on the discussion questions on the final page that you asked. The following questions are provided for discussion purposes. I would suggest that those discussion questions are lacking a question on disproportionate representation in suspensions. How can we address that issue specifically? How can we reduce it? What are the factors? Well, I think we know a lot of the factors that lead to it, but how can we do a better job of mitigating those factors? And then, discussion question number 2 says, how can we help the community better understand student suspensions? I would suggest that it's appropriate to add there, how can we help parents and caregivers and families and students better understand student suspensions? Because I think that's a higher priority than the community at large. Thank you.
Sure, you're through you, Chair. I'll start and then pass it over to Superintendent Lehman to see if he has anything to add. So with reference to the identity-based data and having identity-based data for 35% of the students that we had suspensions issued for, that's because our identity-based data was collected through a student census in 2019 to 2020. So it's based on student participation and engagement in the census, as well as a number of those students either graduating and no longer being in the system, potentially transferring or different reasons why we might be missing data on those particular students. Moving forward, we absolutely would be looking to continue to integrate the suspension data with the identity-based data that we have. And so in doing another round of collection of the identity-based data would increase that percentage. So we would have a better understanding. And then through that, having larger groups of students that we would be able to make some more concrete conclusions about the disproportionate representation. Whereas now most of the data that we have in these tables, we are really exercising caution. Even in the overall 5-year trend of suspension data, really exercising caution because of so many other factors that have been at play. So we don't want to make too strong of conclusions based on the data that's before us. And that's why the importance of really fine tuning those practices moving forward in ongoing data collection.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
You have time.
Why is the identity-based data collected on a voluntary basis from students and families, or is there an additional way of collecting that data that doesn't require involvement of the students and families? So, if we're looking at the total number of students that were suspended, but some of those students or families may not have participated in any kind of self-identification process, is that data just, but obviously the family is whatever, is Black or Asian or lives in a certain neighborhood. Why and how do we collect that? And what are the barriers, I guess, to collecting that data that's not self-reported?
Through you, Chair, there are barriers to collecting self-report data, but we do follow data standards outlined by the Ministry of Education, where it is self-report of the identity-based data, and the students and either their parents or caregivers would disclose that information on their behalf. So I think what I'm hearing from you is the recognition that for some communities to share that information with us, to have on their file, there are barriers to that. And so we do have some structures in place to try to increase participation, build relationships with those communities. We do have a technical advisory group where we get advice on data collection to really, I think the solution to the concern that you've highlighted is increasing the participation in that student census to make sure that those groups are represented and have their voices captured there. So that when we are disaggregating other sets of data like graduation rates, suspension, that we have more fulsome data sets to be better understanding that disproportionality.
And now we will move on to our second time speakers, Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'd like to start by thanking Seema at ACE and Lily at IEC. I think those comments are really pertinent and relevant, and I think understanding data in different ways is important, especially when we look at things like big graphs. My concern is again with those proportions of number of students suspended and number of students who are of different historically marginalized populations, so on and so forth. I want to reiterate the point earlier. I think it was Seema who made this comment, but I don't want to put her on the spot that, you know, looking at the potential correlation between student suspensions and graduation rates or credit accumulation and barriers, I think would be worth looking at to see, you know, if we're not if we're barring our students or harming our students in those suspensions as opposed to uplifting them or finding other resolutions for concerns in the classroom or at school. My question for Manager Rahim is a bit technical, but bear with me. We have heard conversations regarding students who are suspended who reside in lower income neighborhoods. Can I ask, how is that measured? Is it indexed or updated? Considering things like the cost of living crisis that's going on right now, how is that determined? And I'll start there and follow up if necessary if we run out of time.
So I can follow up with you with some more specifics on how exactly that is calculated. It's done through a tax filer system with information that we get from StatsCan using postal code data and using income data that is linked to the postal code data. But as far as the specifics of the calculation, I'd have to follow up with
Okay, meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. That's all for me.
And Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Thank you through you, Chair. This just a quick observation that we're speaking about the students who are suspended, but we haven't talked at all about for those suspensions where it's behavioral issues, who was the target of that suspension and what are we doing to provide supports? And also looking at identity-based, I'd like to see identity-based data for who is the target of the suspension, if there is indeed a target. So it could be another student or it could be staff. So that's one part is to ask for some data on, and that goes to what others have said about asking, what are the reasons for suspension? But I'm thinking about who are the people who were subject to whatever behavioral issue. And then the second part of that is what are the supports that we're providing to those targets? So in terms of mental health supports, in terms of social supports, even educational supports, I suppose. But, if there are staff or students who are adversely affected by such behavior that resulted in suspension, what are we doing for those groups? That's all. Thank you.
And I'll go to the director for this response.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I think some of the elements the Chair and I were just briefly discussing might fall under some of our human rights pieces and some of the elements of that. So we'll take a look at that and where data will be shared in the future in terms of either the suspension report or another area of the reporting we do back to the Board of Trustees from a governance perspective.
Thank you, Director. And moving on, we do still have one more second time speaker. Trustee Lyra, very quickly, please.
It occurred to me that I think once upon a time, this was the suspensions and expulsions report. And I'm wondering where our expulsions data is for this time period.
Through you, Chair, the number of expulsions are quite limited, and the information certainly would be embargoed to the best of my knowledge based on the numbers. So I'm not sure, General Manager Rahim, if we're talking anything under 5 where it's embargoed and we wouldn't report that information. I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know if either you or Executive Officer Giroux or Associate Director Reynolds might have better insight around that.
The number of expulsions on an annual basis is very small. It's definitely, so we could look at including the number, like what the N is, but we wouldn't, recognizing like I believe the number starts as less than 10. So we wouldn't be doing any kind of detailed analysis on the number, but we could definitely report on the number itself.
Yeah, just a sentence or two about the number of expulsions in the system, I think would be appreciated. Thank you.
And I will say thank you all very much. It's nice to have a report like this and actually be able to have some discussion and get some of our questions answered. And I look forward to other similar discussions. Moving on with our agenda then, we are at information items. Is there a report from our OPSPA director? Trustee Jenkins?
Thank you, Chair Scott. Just no report this evening, but Trustee Scott and I will be traveling to Toronto September 22nd, 23rd for the upcoming Board of Directors meeting.
Thank you. And moving on to the new ministry initiatives, that is basically here. The whole thing is here in writing for everybody to read. I don't know if there are any questions. If there are questions, to direct them to staff, please. And moving on then, and oh dear, I don't know why this keeps popping itself backwards. And there is also the memoranda on capital projects. And I don't know whether staff have any comment on that, but again, the information is all there and we will be getting, I believe, a report in October or possibly sooner. I'm not sure when, but before the next set of submissions has to be submitted. So the next item on the agenda, 11.4, is the OSTA update. And on that, I don't know whether there is any information that our OSTA directors are able to share at this time.
Just broad pieces of information, Madam Chair. So I'm sure everyone's aware of the difficulties that OSTA experienced in the startup. One of the comments that many parents and members of the community made was regarding the late information that came out to parents through the transportation portal about cancellations. That was as a result of OSTA trying up to the 11th hour and 59th minute to secure contracts with the operator in the West End, and that's the primary reason for the late release of information. With regards to the situation that we have with the driver shortage, as has been published by OSTA, the system is short about 140 drivers across the system as of now. A couple of drivers have been brought up to speed, and OSTA is doing their best to rework routes and provide alternative options for transportation as they can within the limited resources that they do have. One thing that we suggest to parents, that if there are extenuating compassionate reasons that they are not eligible for transportation, or that there are other circumstances, to reach out to their school office, their school administrators, their principal, to discuss compassionate reasons in which they may need transportation, and there are avenues to pursue in that manner. That's all for me, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Trustee Lee. I have a question from Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. So I'm just looking to confirm that the empty seat program is not going to be reconsidered for this school year.
Correct. So the empty seat program was suspended for the remainder of this school year, given the driver shortage and the resources available. General Manager Kiriako, should some miraculous amount of funding be obtained or provided by the ministry, that situation might change. We will reconsider it, but in terms of the expectation going forward for the community, it should be that the empty seat program will not be available this year in terms of a planning purpose.
Okay, follow-up question. There was a couple of newsletters, at least one newsletter that got sent out with a mistaken reminder for parents to contact if they had requests for the empty seat. So I'm just looking to make sure that all of our principals have been informed that this is not an option.
Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the update. We'll make sure that our principals are reminded.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Ms. Lyon for the Parent Involvement Committee.
Thank you, Chair Scott, and through you. The empty seat program being canceled is very concerning for many families and caregivers, particularly those who are in situations where they may have a disability in the family, that they cannot get their child to school or children to school without a school bus, even though they may live at a distance that doesn't normally permit that child to take the bus. Those families relied on the empty seat program and already struggled for the first month or two of school waiting to be able to get a seat on the empty seat program. I've talked about it at this table before. People have heard me say there are people in my neighborhood who are posting on Facebook saying, I need a ride for my child to school. And that child is driven by strangers or neighbors, which is unacceptable. So I understand that there's a driver shortage and you cannot just materialize people out of thin air. What is the board and OSTA doing to address the needs of those families? If there's simply no empty seat program, what do people do who would otherwise have received a seat on that program and rely on that seat to get their children to school? Thank you.
Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy if Trustee Lee has a perspective. This was one of the difficult decisions that the OSTA board talked about at length in weighing the balance of a number of factors. One of the considerations that I know weighed heavily on me is the fact that the shortages we're currently encountering and some of the other challenges may necessitate changes in routes, which would always have the empty seat element in peril and could conceivably having people on an empty seat, off an empty seat, on an empty seat, off an empty seat repeatedly because of the adaptations OSTA had to make. And so on balance, weighing all the factors, including some of the attempt to get routes addressed, this was one of the things for the time being and the balance of this year to suspend, because it wasn't the kind of more stable considerations of past years. I know that's not satisfying to many individuals, but it was one of the factors. The other piece, and I think Chair Evans spoke to it, in the event some of those pieces stabilize more quickly than maybe anticipated, it's always something that the board can revisit, because we understand those seats were counted on for many of our families. It's just part of all of the logistical challenges that OSTA is facing.
Just a quick follow-up since I have some time left on the clock.
It will have to be very quick because we're fast approaching our 10:30 potential cutoff time, and I still have a couple of speakers.
Thank you, Chair Scott. So what does the board tell those families that can't get their children to school? There are children missing school in my neighborhood.
Through you, Madam Chair, very briefly, OST is looking to meet again with members of the board and with other staff to try and address some of the issues. It's certainly not solely the students around empty seat. It's student more broadly that don't have their transportation. It's definitely a challenge. We really sympathize with the predicament it's placed our parents and guardians and caregivers in. OST is working as quickly as possible to address the issues, but there's no question what you raise as concern is genuine and being felt across the system where there's a lack of transportation, most certainly.
And next, I have Trustee Bell.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you to Trustee Lee for sitting around the OSTA table. Looking back to our delegate that started off this meeting, do you believe that there could be any openness to revisiting the policy that resulted in a 7-year-old being left alone on the street? Thank you.
For sure, I can bring that up to Del Manager Kiriko. I'm pretty sure that that policy definitely did not come up during the last year. So that policy has been in place prior to my time on the board of OSTA. So I can bring it up with her for discussion.
Thank you very much for that. I have no other first-time speakers, and I would like to ask Trustee Nash if she would mind taking the chair again.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. I guess the question that was raised previously by Ms. Lyon is one that applies to a lot of areas across the district, but it certainly applies very, very heavily in the zone that I represent, which is mostly rural. And at the moment, close to 1 student out of 3 students in the schools in my zone has no bus. These students may live 10, 15, even 20 kilometers from the school over 80-kilometer country roads. It is not bikeable. It is certainly not walkable. And there is no OC Transpo service. Parents are desperate for solutions. And I guess the question, and right now they are also desperate for communications because they are not seeing the recognition of the urgency of the need reflected in the communications that they are receiving currently from OSTA and from our board. So my question is, can we get out some better communications when people's jobs are at risk? People's livelihoods are at risk here. And student learning is also at risk because that whole aspect of the social connections to the other students in the school is missing if the students don't get to school. Parents are really struggling. So can we at least try to get some solutions in place quickly and get some better communications out there?
Through you, Madam Chair, and I'll turn it over to Executive Officer Giroux. This is most certainly a concern across the district, but especially in certain areas. We are looking at alternative strategies. Associate Director Giroux and staff that sit on the OSTA board are looking at a number of other potential options, some of which may be more feasible than others, including coach and other charter services, as well as other options. It's most certainly a concern, but I'll turn over to Executive Officer Giroux with the communications comments that are noted. We understand the frustration and challenge this poses to our parents, guardians, and caregivers.
Thanks very much. We did, as some members of the senior team were able to meet with the general manager of OSTA today to get an update. I think an important piece to remember, and we did communicate this, but it certainly can be re-messaged, is that OSTA was clear going into the school year that as difficult as it is during the first 2 weeks of the year, the focus was on stability of the system. And so they wouldn't be able to remedy any of the shortfalls while they worked through some of those issues. So we have that issue to contend with on top of the shortage issues. But the purpose of getting the update was to get some clarity in status and also to talk about messaging. We do have some established practices in communicating on transportation that OSTA is the lead, and the two school boards that are supported work with and support those communications and try and bring consistency and amplification to the message. So we'll definitely follow up and see what opportunities are there to bring more clarity and better support for parents.
Thank you for that.
I shall give you back the chair.
And thank you, Trustee Nash. So I did have, I think, one second time speaker, Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. I missed my question about walking school buses. I've heard some concerns that walking school buses either won't be returning or won't be expanded to schools that we're looking forward to them. Do we have any comments or future predictions on on walking school buses?
So the walking school bus program was as part of the package of deficit reduction at OSTA was paused for this school year in order to supplement the shortage in funding for the yellow and van services. As to whether where we're going to go with that next year, that program will be reevaluated when OSTA does its budget for this year in the spring.
I'm going to lend my voice to the support for the walking school bus program. It is physical activity for students. It is a safe walk for students who might otherwise get driven. And perhaps more importantly, at this particular point in time, you don't need a school board license or a school bus driving license to walk students to school. And so I'd like us to encourage OSTA to revisit that program as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one more speaker on the OSTA update, Trustee Nash. And we have 3 minutes left before we hit the 10:30 vote. So
I just wanted to add that two of my schools the parents are running a program, and the city councilors are also looking. They were looking right now to provide some emergency funding, and if not, then for next year. So there are a lot of talk right now, and because as you correctly point out, it's a very important aspect.
thank you. Thank you for that information, Trustee Nash. Moving on then to new business. Is there any new business tonight?
My apologies. There's a point from Trustee Dixon.
Trustee Dixon, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. With the walking school bus, is there not a way for us to actually collaborate with outside partners to cut costs and bring that in? Because I'm sure right now with the shortage of buses, a lot of parents would actually appreciate us actually putting something like that into place right away than to have to wait. So I'm just wondering if that's not something we can do through the city, because they do have a SAFE program.
I suspect that's a question that can't easily be answered this evening, but staff, I'm sure, will follow up on that, and our OSTA directors will follow up on that. So moving on very quickly to new business. Is there any new business this evening? In that case, with 2 minutes before the 10:30 vote, I will declare this meeting adjourned and express my appreciation for some very good discussions. Thank you.